Hi, everyone. Today we have three stories that will blow your mind. We start off in Oregon, where two Pacific Crest Trail hikers are changed forever by what they encounter in the woods. And then off to Arizona to hear about an insane creature that a listener stumbled upon crossing the road in the middle of the desert. And finally, we end up in Northern California, where a simple game of hide and seek nearly turns deadly. So if you're enjoying our adventure together, please like and subscribe. Thanks. Now let's get into the stories. Hi, Lilith. I don't know how long your channel's been around, but I sure wish I had it to listen to when I had this experience. I'm only now sharing it because this community seems willing to take this kind of thing seriously. During the economic crisis in 2008, my best friend Paul and I were both furloughed from our positions at the government agency we worked for. It was such an unexpected thing. We wanted to make the best of it, even though we had no choice in the matter. Neither of us had any real commitments keeping us tied down. So after going back and forth on some ideas, we decided that we were going to pack up and hike part of the Pacific Crest Trail. The PCT is 2,650 miles. We weren't prepared for that kind of distance, but we did want to at least do a section of it. We didn't know how long the furlough would last. We were both in good shape, we got some advice from one of our hiking friends, and we planned out all the things we would need. We live in Oregon, so we were starting there and heading south. We got dropped off at a section trailhead and started walking. We had enough supplies for 3 weeks. We took a bunch of freeze-dried food and some fishing equipment. We weren't really that into covering a lot of miles, and we also just wanted to enjoy being in the wilderness. We'd spent our days in the office for too long. We shot a rabbit the first night, cooked it over the fire. It was tough and gamey, but we liked the idea of catching some of our own food. There was a little light rain that night, so we set our tent up under a ledge so that we wouldn't get wet. We got up early to clear up our campsite, and we were kind of surprised to see the rabbit remnants had disappeared. The fur, the bones, and the head were all gone. I said maybe a fox or something had gotten it, but Paul thought it was a little weird that every bit of it was gone. It didn't seem like an animal would have had much use for rabbit fur. We packed up and got going. We went about 12 miles that day, which felt like a lot for us. We got our campsite set up by the stream. We had read that there was some pretty good fishing in that area, so we got our little shelter built for ourselves and we managed to catch 4 brown trout. I must say they tasted incredible after all that hiking. We hung out for a while and got to bed at about 9, and then at around midnight we heard something walking around the campsite, and it sounded like it was on 2 feet. I've done a considerable amount of hunting, so I can usually tell when something is walking around like a human. And then we smelled something like the most horrible body odor you can imagine. Paul wanted to go outside and check it out, but I convinced him to stay in the tent and to wait for just a bit, hoping that whatever it was would just go away. But the noise kept up. Finally, we unzipped the tent flap enough to look out, and we were shocked to see something huge and hair-covered sniffing around the campfire. It was only about 15 to 20 feet from us, and it was on 2 feet, but it was not a human. I estimated it to be about 8 feet tall. I looked over at Paul, and his eyes were just huge. We sat there thinking this was going to be the end of us if that thing reached us. And I don't know what the hell it was, but it looked like some kind of a giant Neanderthal or something. I watched it sniffing around, and then it turned its head toward the tent, and it had these beady black eyes. The face definitely looked like a caveman. It lifted its head up and let out this incredible loud whooping sound. At that point, all I could think to do was to grab the pellet gun. I pointed it out the tent, and I gave a warning shot into the air. And when it went off, this thing, whatever it was, took off through the trees with the most god-awful yelping noises that I've ever heard. Thinking about it still gives me chills to this day, and needless to say, we didn't sleep that night. As soon as the sun came up, we went out to look around. In one direction going away from the campsite, we found about 20 to 30 yards of small fir trees trampled over completely. And there were these huge footprints that were similar to a human's, but they were 2 to 3 times as big as my feet. So after considering our options, Paul and I decided to head out, back to civilization. That encounter had scared the crap out of both of us. We ended up hiking to a small town and going to the local bar. I'm sure we looked like a couple of beggars after that. But after a few beers, we started talking about what we saw, and I thought they would make fun of us, but nobody seemed surprised. Some of them even seemed to get into a debate about the history of Bigfoot in the area, and I was honestly kind of shocked to hear them talking about it so casually. Paul and I were considering making a report, and that's when they did kind of start making fun of us. Our pickup person eventually came and got us, and we ended up not reporting it at all. This is actually the first time I've even really told anybody about it since that day. Sometimes I think we should have just kept on going on our truck, but I've no idea what that creature might have been capable of. I know it's hard to believe something if you've never personally experienced the supernatural. Living here in the Southwest, I grew up with stories like these. Others have not. Trust me, sometimes I don't even know what to believe, but I believe the things that my eyes see. I believe the way my heart feels, and I most definitely believe in what happened to me on that highway some years ago. I was working an hour away from home at the time. During the summers, it wasn't too bad. I'd get home before sunset, but when the seasons changed, it was like I never saw sunlight at my house. I was gone before the sun would rise, and I'd come back after it set. Sometimes I felt like I was living in Alaska, but my mom would laugh and just say, "The desert is a long way from Alaska." But it still felt similar to me. I would travel from one state to another every day. I lived pretty close to the border, basically next door, and I suppose that was a good conversation starter. But really, it didn't change too much going from one state to another, but I would still always find ways to make it sound more interesting than it was. And then it happened. Something unusual, something unexplainable, something that my mind still can't figure out. I was driving home, and it was one of those days where you just really wanted to enjoy it and make the best of things. I was in a good mood, too. And so I decided that I wanted to take my time getting home. It was getting dark at this point, but the sun hadn't set all the way down. I'm driving along pleasantly when I see something dart out in front of my car. To me, it looked like some type of a wolf or a coyote or something, but it was massive, whatever it was, and that startled me. So I stomped on my brakes, and luckily this highway was never occupied by anyone other than me, ever. But whatever this thing was, I did hit it a little bit. I was scared, and I wished somebody else had been there to help, but I was on my own. I didn't experience any injuries myself, and I stopped in time before anything devastating happened, but I did slide into it, like I said. I knew that I had to get out and check to see what was going on, and hoping that everything was okay and that I hadn't injured it in a major way. But I'm nervous. I'm still nervous. So I'm sitting in the middle of the highway, and I'm looking toward the side of the interstate to see if I can identify the thing. Honestly, I started wondering if the mass was a person at that point, because it seemed like it was walking along on its hind legs. But that didn't really make sense, so I basically couldn't identify it with positivity. I wasn't entirely sure what to do, and it sounded like a very stupid situation, but it was incredibly worrisome. So I tried calling out to it, and I shouted, "Are you okay?" But I obviously didn't get a response. And it seems silly to be asking this strange mass if it's okay. I realize that. But as I'm watching it walk further away from my car and into the desert, it looks to be standing even more upright now. Now I know that could have been from the position I was in, but that's how it looked. And then the thing vanished completely. In a way, I was sort of relieved, but a part of me still felt this tremendous amount of guilt. So I got out of my car. My first instinct was to look at the front of my car to see if there was any damage, hoping that this would tell me if I had hurt it. I didn't see any blood, but I did see a little crack in my bumper and some hair that might have been tugged out when I pulled it away. The hair was dark and coarse, but it was surprisingly long, and it seemed too long to belong to a wolf. But again, a human out here running across the highway didn't sound very believable either. I looked around the ground to see if there was any blood on the road. Didn't appear so. So now I'm wondering if I'm safe to drive away, but this thing keeps nagging at my mind. I felt so guilty, and I just had to be 100% sure that this wasn't a person. I wanted to see if I could find some track marks to get a concrete answer to the whole mess. So it's dark at this point, but I always keep a flashlight in my car. Driving on the highway at night without a flashlight would be really stupid, and this scenario proves that. Anyway, I get my flashlight and I walk to the side of the road closest to me, which happens to be the side that the thing started out on. Unfortunately, the tracks on that side of the road weren't really identifiable. The thing was running fast when I saw it, so perhaps that's why I couldn't identify those tracks. So I moved to the other side of the highway. Now let me make this as brief as I can. What I saw doesn't make sense. Just like the mass I saw when I hit it, it didn't make sense. Or the shadow walking away from me didn't make sense. Basically, I saw tracks, but the tracks didn't appear to come from one thing. It seemed like the tracks started out like a wolf or a coyote, but then they started to shift into something that looked human. And I know that this sounds unreal, totally unbelievable, but that's the only way I can describe what I saw. Eventually, I'm so freaked out that I decide I'm not equipped to handle this. I might have hit somebody, and the responsibility was on me to call and report the incident. So I did. The deputies did not know what to tell me other than it must have been a wolf because they didn't find any trace of a human being out on the side of the highway. But what I saw, all the different things that I saw, sort of seemed to suggest otherwise. And I'm hoping you guys can offer up some suggestions as to what happened to me. I can't believe I'm writing this. I mean, I'm the one it happened to, and I still can't believe I'm actually putting it down on paper. Anyway, this was a while ago, the summer that I was 13. I lived in a pretty rural development that backed up to a national forest in Northern California. My house was toward the end of a cul-de-sac, and no, we didn't get a lot of cars coming through except for people coming home after work. What made our neighborhood really interesting, though, was the old DeHoit place at the end of the street. It was the perfect poster child for a haunted house. The iron fence was a little rusty, the windows were big and covered over. Even the yard looked like it was haunted because of the crazy long grass and the big bushes growing in weird places. All of us kids knew to stay away from it. I mean, to us the house looked more like an axe murderer lived there. So there we were, all of us kids in the neighborhood, maybe about 10 of us, and somebody has a great idea to play kickball in the street. Fine, we go on having fun until Mark kicked the thing too hard and it went over the fence and into the DeHoit yard. I remember that right at that moment we all stopped and stared at him and then turned around to look at the DeHoit place. The grass was so high I couldn't even see where the ball landed. Mark refused to go and get it and said it was because we weren't supposed to trespass, but I think it was just because he was scared. So all the kids then started nudging one another, "You go get it." Well, some angel must have been looking out for me because that was when my mom called me in to dinner. So I had a great excuse to say that I couldn't go do it. After dinner, though, there was still plenty of daylight, so we all got booted back outside by our parents. We couldn't play kickball anymore, though, thanks to Mark, and nobody was brave enough to hop the fence to go look for the ball. No problem, we decided to play hide-and-seek instead. So we did a few rounds of hide-and-seek, and one of the kids was seriously a champion hider. It took forever to find her. Our games dragged on until the streetlights came on. Now, I'm competitive, so I wanted to win at least one game tonight, and if it couldn't be kickball, then it was going to have to be hide-and-seek. I knew some of the parents were going to start to call the kids home, and then we'd have to stop, and I would go to bed having lost, and I didn't want that. So I talked my friends into one last game. Mark was it. He started counting, and everybody scattered, except me, because I'd thought of the perfect place to hide. I pretended to hide across the street, but as soon as I saw most of my friends hide, I ran for the other end of the street. The fence at the DeHoit house was too high for me to jump, but the gate had been locked with a padlock and a chain, an old one, and it was open just enough, and I was just skinny enough to squeeze through. I remember thinking something weird, that being in the DeHoit yard felt, well, I guess weird is the only way to call it. Like it felt like I was being watched weird. The creepy feeling made me not want to go deep into the yard, but I figured I didn't have to. I just ducked into the tall weeds by the fence and waited. I heard Mark yell out, "Here I come!" And then I remember hearing feet pounding the pavement. Still weird that it kind of felt like the sound was muffled, even though I was really close to the fence. My hiding place was pretty airtight, though, because I kept hearing "got you," which I think lasted about 10 minutes. And I was starting to congratulate myself on winning the game when I heard, "Hey, there's still two missing." And then somebody's front door opened and I heard a parent yell for Devin and Amanda to come inside. The others started really hunting for us because we were just so close to being done with the game. I really didn't want to make it this far and lose, and since I was close to the fence, if they got close enough, I'd be spotted. So I figured I would sort of army crawl backward to get in better under cover. There was a big bush nearby, so I backed towards that. By now it was pretty dark, and I couldn't really see the kind of bush I was hiding by, just the branches that were hanging low near my face. And it had a lot of thick leaves, and it was really tall. So with my belly to the ground like I was, all I could smell was the dirt and the crushed grass and some weird musky smell. It smelled like wet dog to me, but not quite, but I just sort of chalked it up to being the smell of the DeHoit house. But then I heard a growl, and it was a deep sound, like a really big dog. And I would always hear people say that the hair on the back of their neck would stand up when they were scared, but I had never had it happen to me. Well, it was happening now. The big bush rustled, but it sounded like something was pushing the branches, not just the wind. And then that wet dog musk smell got stronger, and I didn't dare turn my head to look because I just knew that something was behind me. And then the growl came again, deep and close. And I don't remember what happened next. I don't remember how I got out of there. All I know is I suddenly was outside the fence and running for my house like a monster was chasing me, screaming that there was something horrible at the DeHoit house. It took my parents a long time to get me to calm down, and even then I refused to go near the windows or the doors until they were closed and locked. My dad said that I might have even run into a bear and I was lucky to get away. My brother said it was just a dog and that I was being a baby, but I don't think it was either of those. Later I did some research on weird things in the area and I found some information on Sasquatch. It described the same musky, wet dog smell that I smelled that night, and the growling too. I told my dad what I found out, but he didn't believe me. None of them did. Am I crazy? I don't think so. At least I hope I'm not. All I know is I've never gone into the woods past dark ever since. Let me know what you think about these stories in the comments below. And don't forget to check out Donovan Dread, who releases almost every single day. Also, if you like true crime, then check out Donovan Dread True Crime. There are new releases several times a week.